Okay, is Sunday, December the 20,
It'll be the 19th,
December 19th.
because tomorrow is the 20th.
Monday, December 19th, 2021. And we're continuing the interview with Meriel Howard. And Mom, we kind of ended last session kind of talking about your childhood, and we were really kind of talking about how rustic and how almost primitive that you were raised in. We talked a little bit about your arrangement. So I got a quick question for you.
Yeah.
Tell me about your beds back in those days. You didn't have mattresses like you buy over here at the stores.
Um, we did have several. The mother, I think, was able to buy through Sears and Roebuck catalog. But also we used straw. Let me see, straw mattresses. Yeah. I remember one time my grandmother and her mother were making something out of hay, but they didn't want to do it with hay because hay doesn't lay down like straw. I remember they were saying straw was the best.
Straw was the best.
Yeah. They had some old sheets that I guess they got through the Sears and Roebuck catalog that he had sewed together, and they had just stuffed it with straw. That was good enough.
Okay.
Yeah, but then they did have some mattresses. Uh, what was interesting was Grandpa and Grammy Lane on their farm. They were second cousins, and they did have some relatives that were more affluent. And when the relatives would die, the family would often bring a lot of their furniture down to the farm because at the farm they had a huge attic, and there was a lot of stuff up in that attic that had been brought down through the years when my mother was growing up from the relatives, and there was a lot of this material stuff that they had used at the farm for the family, and some of those things mother was given to mother, and some of it was probably. I never remember there ever but my dad and mother going to buy any furniture or anything, but I think I got a few things like that, like a bed or a bedding from, brought from the farm
Mm-hmm.
that had been stored up in their attic, because I remember there was tables and chairs and lots of things all stuffed up there together.
So you were the oldest
Grandchild.
grandchild and the oldest of your
Siblings.
parents' children.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So what role did you play in the house? Did you do a lot of the child care? Did you do cleaning? What was kind of your role?
It was more or less being kind of a nanny to my siblings, to my little ones. Mother liked to have me with them, kind of supervising them. She wanted to know what was going on all the time. Just being a surrogate mother, kind of like on them. I do remember that at one time I recognized that they were becoming to me for all their little hurts and things. And I remember looking up and watching my mother's face, and I suddenly realized that she was very angry. And so I backed off. And from then on, when they would come to me for these things, I would tell them to go to Mother, and they did.
Okay, so they were responding to you more so because of your nature.
Yeah.
So your mom was she was a disciplinarian and not a warm fuzzy.
I'm realizing my grandmother was a little workhorse. Oh, she worked so hard. She was not a cuddly mother. And my mother was the same way. My mother was really not a little workhorse, but housework and mother really was not her thing. Family history, genealogy, writing letters. My mother was more of a. They said she, had training to be a teacher, and she. And then I realized, in my own raising my own children, I realize now I remember the first time I saw my little daughter-in-law, Sue, how she handled her children. She'd hug them and she'd cuddle them and she'd play with them. And you know, like nowadays you see mothers doing it. I never saw it being done. I didn't do it with my children. I never saw it. And I was so astonished and when I saw this, and I thought a lot about it, the feeling I had, almost of loss. I never, only if a child was sick, would you rock them, cuddle them. You raised your children, and I raised my children, but I don't ever remember having any really fun, doing fun things. The one thing I really admired about Terry and Cindy's family was they played games together. And had lots of fun playing games. And I remember my father growing up, he and his mother and their family played games. And I remember at one time going over with my father, visiting my grandmother, and we did play penny ante and a few things like that, and having a grand old time. But my mother, the years that she was going to high school, she was living with her grandmother, because there wasn't any high school any closer. And her grandmother was a Quaker. And I think my mother picked up a lot of Quaker ideas. And she disapproved of that. So I remember one Christmas, my father came home from Portland, where he'd been working at the Portland shipyard, and he had presents for his children. And that's the only time I remember Dad bringing any presents home. But he did have presents for everybody, and my present was a great big game board. You know, it was designed so you can play lots of different games on it. But I had absolutely no interest in it. But my father and the rest of my siblings would sit around playing games, and they'd want me to play with them. But I knew Mother disapproved, so I didn't know. And I never had played games since because of her deep disapproval of it. My mother did. I remember my mother telling me that she remembers talking about her grandparents. Grandpa Andrews was a jolly guy, and she remember seeing him playing chess with some friends, but drinking apple cider and getting a little bit on the high on the end. And there would be grandma, she was a Quaker, sitting in a rocking chair knitting with such a scowl on her face. But they stayed married all those years, and they had family. But so I think a lot of these, well, with maybe on analyzing me here and there, that some of my queer ideas were handed down, were more Quakerish type of things. It wasn't necessarily the way people did it, but to me it was what I had seen. And I think my mother also had acquired some of those ideas. But we did not, I do remember something that was, I cherished. Mother would take us to the little village library in the summertime. And we got a lot of the books for children. There was a whole series of children that were boxcar children and a whole series of different books that designed for children, and Mother would read them to us. And she'd read for an hour or two, and then she'd have to stop and go and get dinner or something. And I just couldn't stand it. So I'd sneak the book and try to learn how to read. At school, they did not teach us phonics. I didn't know there's such a thing as phonics, or sounds of words or letters. And other children seemed to be able to pick up reading just by sight. And I tried so hard, but it just didn't work with me. It simply didn't work. I could not learn to read that way. So, but that summer, wanting to know what was happening on the next few pages, that the miracle was there, I would spend hours reading what words I could make out and trying to piece it together with the words I didn't know. I taught myself to read. Anyway, and I have enjoyed reading ever since. It's been a great, that's been my dad loved to read. He loved to read. He didn't have any books, but he would read National Geographic. Well, let me see. We had the some of the magazines would come. And he enjoyed reading those.
So how do you think your upbringing affected your type of books that you eventually were gravitated towards?
Well, in those my early years of marriage, I loved those. Oh dear, I almost hate to, I'm embarrassed to tell you, but those love stories, you know, we had all those paper, I don't know, you know, dime a dozen type of love.
The Harlequin romance books.
Oh yeah, oh yes, those years, yes, that was my thing. But I did read, I did read the Book of Mormon, but I really didn't much understand it, but I'm reading it again now and getting a lot more out of it. And I had read it a few times in between. I love those books written by Cleon Skousen. Oh yeah, I love those books. And you know, anything I could get my hands onto, I quite enjoyed. But Cleon Skousen. What's that book I like so much about Cleon Skousen? No, let me see. The one that wrote, oh, see, my memory slips. That whole series of books about, oh dear.
Are they novels?
Well,
Kind of historical novels set in. No, that's okay. That's okay.
It'll pop up back. It'll pop back where it's supposed to be in a minute.
So you mentioned the library there in Freiburg.
Yeah, they had a little library there.
So you could, like libraries today, you have your card, you check out a book, and you take it back. And there was always plenty of books for you to read.
Yes.
So were you a reader at a young age and liked to kind of read?
Yes, once I learned how to read, I could go and get books from the library.
Yeah.
And later I was able to go and get some books that I wanted to read, and some of them were more adult type of books. My dad loved to read, and my mother liked to read, and that was something that was acceptable. Mm-hmm. It was something acceptable.
So were the rest of your siblings were some readers and others were not?
They all loved to be read too.
They all read too.
But I don't remember.
Okay.
I don't remember those middle years, you know, when Nona was gone, and the other children.
So tell me about some of your mother's qualities, her exceptional good qualities. What were some of the qualities that she really excelled in? You've told me that the neighborhood thought and the community, because she was outspoken, she was kind of a poor, she had black clothes, and she was kind of coined as the witch of the community, right?
She was very intelligent.
Very intelligent.
She was very intelligent. She was oh dear. She was very opinionated. She she wrote letters all the time. Her connection with her family was with letters. There was no TV, there was no phones, there was nothing like that. But she was writing all the time. But the problem was she didn't have any money for stamps or paper or anything. Dad just didn't, he just didn't hand over any money. But I remember one thing that she did. We know the milkman would bring the milk, and I guess Dad just assumed that he took back the bottles, but Mother sold the bottles. I don't know, about 5 cents a piece or something like that, and somehow she was able to get a little bit of money like that she could buy stamps with. And I think sometimes maybe family members might have sent her a little bit of money. And family history. And of course, all the old family pictures that I have in the Elaine book were pictures that she had acquired over the years that I had put into a book form. And then the histories that we have, that I have in my cupboard there, was her work.
Now, you mentioned that she was trained to be a teacher.
Yeah.
Was this formal training or
Well,
a certificate attached to the training?
well, she went to Gorham Normal School, but she had no money, so she was working her way through. And what she was having to wait on tables. And she said her health broke down. She just couldn't keep up her studies and work at the same time. And so finally she went home. So she never did finish, but the years after she left my dad and went home with the children, she did teach at a couple of country schools, the little one-room schools, and we children went there, and she had license. They licensed her to do that. And then she had appendicitis, and then my dad came and took us home with him, and well, they tried to make up, and it was pretty good for a while, but she.
So did she have a sense of humor? Was she, did she like comedy? Did she like to laugh?
No.
She wasn't jovial or wasn't light-minded?
No, nothing.
What about music? Did she like music?
She loved to play the piano.
Okay. Who taught her the piano?
Apparently one of the things that they had at the farm was a piano, probably from some relative that had died. And she did learn. I don't know. She taught herself. She learned to play the piano and the organ. They had an organ there too. And she did. And when one time my dad was paid by somebody giving him a piano instead of money. Mm-hmm. And that was lovely. And she enjoyed playing the hymns. But when she and my dad quarreled, and she'd get all worked up, she'd sit down and start playing the piano. And that offended my dad terribly.
Could she read music?
Yes.
Okay, so she could read music.
Yes. Anyway, so eventually he gave the piano away without my mother knowing it. And she was furious. Give it to a family that had no interest in music at all. So that was that. It was a big, old, awkward piano anyway. It wasn't an upright piano. It was one of those that took up a lot of room. But because it took up so much room in the living room, and the living room was so small, I remember one whole winter we had a mattress up on there, and we slept up. Somebody slept up there on top of the piano. But I remember when Joyce and the youngest baby was born, Dad had built. Anyway, had fixed it so I think it was the piano. Well, maybe it wasn't the piano. Maybe I don't know. There was a bed in the living room, and Dad had put it on stilts, preparing for Mother's birth. And that was right there, near the fireplace where it was warm. And I remember that. And when my grandmother came, and I remember Dad had gone to get the doctor, and my grandmother took us up to the children up to the next house, which was where Uncle Edwin and Aunt Phyla had built. But they weren't living there anymore, but it was vacant. But she went in, and we children stayed there. She built up the fire in the big old stove, and on the floor was, apparently somebody had salvaged the beans in the garden, and had brought them in. They were still in their shells, and they were sitting there on the floor, and Grammy said we could stomp on them and stomp the beans out. We kids had a grand time, and the fire was built. And I remember we saw the little car with the doctor coming down past. And then pretty soon my Grammy came back and said we had a little baby sister.
So were most of the births back then in their homes?
Most of them. I was born at home.
Yeah.
I was born at home. However, some of my siblings were born at the Conway Hospital, but I don't know anything really about that. In those days, children weren't told anything. See, we didn't sit down and discuss anything that was going on around. You know, you just have to be kind of, you just, so what I kind of picked up just by listening. I got to be a pretty good listener. Mother had a friend, Blanche Palmer. Her husband worked with my dad a lot. They become friends. John, his name was John Palmer, and his wife's name was Blanche, and they had seven kids. They weren't interested in the church at all, but Blanche and Mother kind of enjoyed each other. But what drew them apart, drew them together, was they both loved to tell how horrible their husbands were.
That's a good pastime, isn't it?
It was just like a soap opera, you know. And they'd get together and they'd spend the time talking about their husbands. And oh, I found it so interesting. And when they catch me sitting there listening, they'd drive me out. But I would sit just on the other side of the door, crouched down. Boy, I couldn't miss that. I mean, that was high adventure. But I vowed even as a child, that when I got married, I never would discuss and talk about my husband. And I never did. I never did. But of course, really, with Tom, there wasn't anything horrible to talk about. He treated me good. But I vowed, if any quirks, anything that bothered me, I knew I would not broadcast it about. And I didn't. And that's what I would tell any bride or any husband. Yeah, these are things you work out yourself. You don't go broadcasting it to your friends. And, you know, you just no more than you'd want them to do the same about you. Mm-hmm. And we all have quirks, and we're all a little bit queer in different ways to others. Anyway, and you know, those are all, really, you come right down to often are endearing qualities, mm-hmm. or things that can be worked out. I remember Tom would comment that when I laughed, I would put my hand over my mouth, and why I did that, I don't know, but he finally broke me of that. Mm-hmm. He'd keep commenting on me about that, you know, and why, and you know, why do you put your hand over your mouth when you laugh? And I don't know why I did, but mm-hmm. I did. But maybe, I don't know, that was something, but.
So tell me about, what did your mom like to cook? Well, what was some of her favorite dishes?
I don't think my mother liked to cook at all. I think she just cooked to fill us up. Well, let me tell you just one experience that I remember as a child. Mother had a flock of hens. They were her hens. You know, they would have chickens. They would have the baby chickens, and she'd take care of them and all. But whenever she thought we needed a hen to eat, she'd have to go out and catch it, and she'd always choose the ones that no longer were egg layers, or the older ones, and she'd have to find them and cut off their heads herself. And you know, it's quite a bit of work getting all those feathers off and everything and getting them cleaned out. And well, I remember one time she knew that my grandmother and one of my uncles were bringing my grandmother up to visit us on a certain day.
Keep going. May volunteer. Okay, well, I want to finish the hen story.
And while there was planning on their
Hi.
She's in the middle of finishing a hen story. You want to go check on Annette? Well, I haven't heard from her this morning.
Anyway, and
Well, sleep good, you guys?
Yeah.
let me just finish this paragraph here. And
sorry. I don't want to be in the middle of
and she knew they were going to be here, and she expected them to probably have dinner at about noon, have dinner ready about noon. And I remember my mother didn't even go out to catch the hen, to kill the hen until it was about 10 o'clock. And then, of course, you know, she had to clean it and everything. She didn't make us kids do all that. I learned how, though, you know, but I never killed a hen. But anyway, and here she was, and she put the hen in the oven. And when they came, you know, she kept looking in the oven, wondering why that chicken wasn't cooked. Well, I knew darn well why that chicken wasn't being cooked. She didn't get it in the oven soon enough. You know, it takes time to cook a chicken. And she couldn't understand why that chicken didn't cook. And I thought, so my superior, well, I knew why. She hadn't had it any long enough to cook. she wasn't practical. Now, my other grandmother, my father's mother, was very, very practical. But my mother wasn't practical. And sometimes I didn't think she had very much common sense. But she was a dear, dear soul, very loyal to those that she felt like needed it and, you know, and were worthy of it. And she loved her kids. She did love us. She was fiercely a mother bear. Anybody that harmed her kids, you know, in her own way, you know, she was an awfully good mother.
Okay, well, we will adjourn at that. Thank you, Mom. So Annette, Mavon, and I are getting ready to hop on a plane and go up to Pasco for the funeral of Jacob. So hopefully we'll continue this at another day.
Well, I hope we have another day, dear.
I hope so too.